The African sun beats down upon the dusty plain, its heat shimmering in waves above the sparse grassland. A small band of hominids moves silently through the tall grass. Not quite human, not quite something else. Caught in the evolutionary in-between. They walk upright, their bodies leaner than ours, their brows more pronounced. Homo heidelbergensis, our distant ancestors from 500,000 years ago. The group pauses near a fallen tree. One of them, a male with scarred hands, kneels and examines something on the ground. His fingers, longer than ours with thicker joints, trace a pattern in the soil. Not random marks, but something deliberate. A series of interconnected lines forming what appears to be a crude map of the nearby terrain. The others gather around, their eyes reflecting something we might recognize: curiosity, understanding, communication. But is it possible? Could these ancient beings, separated from us by hundreds of thousands of years, already possess the capacity for symbolic thought? This is the question that haunts paleoanthropologists and cognitive scientists alike. When exactly did our ancestors cross that invisible threshold from instinctual behavior to imagination, from survival to symbolic thought? The conventional timeline suggests that complex symbolic thinking, the ability to represent one thing with another, emerged relatively recently, perhaps 40,000 to 70,000 years ago. The so-called cognitive revolution that gave rise to cave art, figurines, and the explosion of cultural innovations. But what if this timeline is wrong? What if the cognitive spark that makes us human ignited much earlier? Perhaps 500,000 years ago, when our ancestors still occupied that middle ground between ancient hominin and modern human. Welcome to an exploration of humanity's most profound mystery, the birth of the imaginative mind. Tonight, we'll journey through time to investigate a possibility that challenges everything we think we know about human cognitive evolution. By the way, have you ever wondered when your ancestors first began to think symbolically? Share your thoughts in the comments. We're fascinated by how our community contemplates these deep questions about our shared past. The evidence we'll examine is fragmentary, contested, and often overlooked. Subtle markings on ancient bones, curious arrangements of stones, anomalous artifacts that don't fit neatly into our understanding of cognitive development. These pieces form a puzzle that suggests our capacity for abstract thought, for symbolism and imagination, may have emerged far earlier than we've been led to believe. Not in a sudden revolution, but through a gradual awakening spanning hundreds of thousands of years. Imagine standing by a lakeshore 500,000 years ago. The air is different, richer in oxygen, filled with scents of plants now extinct. The soundscape alien, yet familiar. A group of early humans gathers by the water's edge. One picks up a reddish stone and begins to scrape it against a smooth rock surface, creating a pigment. With deliberate movements, they apply this color to their skin. Is this simply instinctual behavior? Or does it represent something more profound? The first stirrings of aesthetic awareness, of symbolic thinking, of creativity. This is not merely an academic question. If we've misunderstood when and how our capacity for imagination emerged, we may have fundamentally misinterpreted who we are as a species. Our journey begins with a central paradox. The archaeological record shows a puzzling gap. Simple stone tools appear 2.6 million years ago, yet complex symbolic artifacts seem absent until relatively recently. But between these extremes lies a vast period, hundreds of thousands of years, during which our ancestors' brains grew larger, their social structures more complex. What was happening in their minds during this long silence? Recent discoveries suggest they weren't silent at all. We simply haven't been listening closely enough. From enigmatic markings on 500,000-year-old shells in Java to geometric engravings on bones from China, dating back 125,000 years, evidence is mounting that symbolic thinking predates our previous estimates by hundreds of millennia. Tonight, we'll examine this evidence piece by piece. We'll consider alternative explanations and weigh competing theories. And we'll ask what it means if the capacity for imagination, that most human of traits, has been with us far longer than we thought. The stakes are profound. If our understanding of when symbolic thought emerged is wrong, then our entire narrative of human cognitive evolution requires revision. What we're really asking is, when did we become human? Not in our bodies, but in our minds. When did instinct give way to imagination? The answer may lie 500,000 years in the past. In a moment we can only glimpse through the fragmentary remains our ancestors left behind. A moment when someone, not quite human as we know it, first conceived of something beyond the immediate and tangible. The first dreamer, the first storyteller, the first one to look at the world and see not just what is, but what could be. This is their story and ours. The story of how instinct became imagination. Chapter 2. The Symbolic Revolution. Why it matters. What makes you human? If you strip away the technology, the language, the complex social structures, what remains that separates you from other creatures on this planet? Many would answer, imagination. The ability to think symbolically, to represent one thing with another, to create meaning beyond the literal. This capacity underlies everything we consider uniquely human: art, religion, mathematics, literature, science. Every cultural achievement, every technological innovation, every philosophical insight depends on our ability to think beyond the concrete and immediate. The conventional narrative tells us this ability emerged suddenly, around 40,000 years ago, in what scholars call the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, or the creative explosion. Cave paintings appeared, figurines, musical instruments, the full flowering of symbolic culture. Before this, so the story goes, our ancestors were intelligent but fundamentally different. They made tools, controlled fire, hunted cooperatively, but they couldn't think symbolically, couldn't imagine, couldn't create. This narrative is comforting in its simplicity. It gives us a clear dividing line between human and not quite human, between creatures of instinct and creatures of imagination. But what if this narrative is wrong? What if symbolic thought isn't a recent innovation, but an ancient capacity that developed gradually over hundreds of thousands of years? The implications would be profound. We would need to reimagine our evolutionary journey, reconceive what it means to be human, and reconsider our relationship to our ancient ancestors. The traditional timeline suggests that anatomically modern humans emerged around 300,000 years ago, but remained cognitively similar to earlier hominins until a neural mutation approximately 40,000 years ago. This mutation supposedly enabled symbolic thought, leading to the explosion of cultural innovations we see in the archaeological record. But a growing body of evidence challenges this view. Deliberate engravings on ochre from Blombos Cave in South Africa date to 73,000 years ago. Perforated shell beads used as jewelry appear 120,000 years ago. Even more startling, recent discoveries suggest symbolic behaviors may extend back 400,000 to 500,000 years, to species that weren't even Homo sapiens. To our evolutionary cousins and ancestors, Neanderthals, Denisovans and Homo heidelbergensis. If true, this would mean the capacity for symbolic thought isn't unique to our species. It would be a shared heritage across the human family tree, developing gradually over hundreds of millennia. Why does this matter? Because it changes everything about how we understand ourselves and our place in nature. If symbolic thinking emerged gradually rather than suddenly, then the boundary between human and animal becomes blurred. The qualities we consider uniquely human, creativity, spirituality, abstract thought, would exist on a continuum rather than appearing in a single evolutionary leap. This challenges our exceptionalism, our sense of separateness from the natural world, our belief that we alone possess the spark of imagination. But it also connects us more deeply to our evolutionary past, to those ancient beings who first began to see beyond the literal, to imagine possibilities, to create meaning. Consider what it would mean if Homo heidelbergensis, our ancestor from 500,000 years ago, could think symbolically. This species had a brain size intermediate between earlier hominins and modern humans, around 1200 CC compared to our 1350 CE. They created sophisticated stone tools, built shelters, controlled fire, and hunted large animals cooperatively. Why? But could they also create art, develop rituals, contemplate their own existence? The traditional answer has been no. But the emerging evidence suggests we've underestimated them and all our ancient relatives. If symbolic thought extends back 500,000 years, it would mean that dozens of human species and subspecies, most now extinct, shared this capacity. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo erectus and others weren't just intelligent tool users, but potentially artists, storytellers, philosophers in their own right. This reframes extinct human species not as evolutionary dead ends, but as alternative expressions of the human capacity for imagination. Each with their own cultural traditions, symbolic systems and ways of understanding the world. The stakes extend beyond academia. How we understand our cognitive evolution shapes how we view human nature itself. If symbolic thinking emerged suddenly and recently, it suggests a fundamental discontinuity in our development. A moment when we became essentially different from all that came before. But if it emerged gradually over hundreds of thousands of years, through subtle enhancements of capacities shared with earlier hominins, it suggests continuity. Connection rather than separation, evolution rather than revolution. This alternative narrative also raises profound questions about other intelligent species. If symbolic thinking evolved gradually in humans, could it evolve in other lineages as well? What about the sophisticated cognition we observe in elephants, corvids, cetaceans, and great apes? Might they be at different points along a similar trajectory of symbolic development? The implications extend to how we think about consciousness itself. If symbolic thought is ancient and widespread, perhaps consciousness too exists on a spectrum rather than as a binary presence or absence. As we reconsider when instinct became imagination, we're really asking about the nature of mind, about what it means to be a thinking being in a physical universe. The answer matters not just for understanding our past, but for contemplating our future, for considering how consciousness and cognition might continue to evolve in our species and perhaps beyond it. This is the lens through which we'll examine the evidence tonight. Not just as an academic exercise in dating ancient artifacts, but as a profound inquiry into the nature of mind itself. When did our ancestors first look at the world and see not just what was there, but what could be? When did they first dream, imagine, create? When did they become, in the fullest sense, human? The answer may lie 500,000 years in our past. In subtle marks on ancient bones, in patterns of stones laid out with apparent purpose, in traces of pigment carefully collected and preserved. These fragments tell a story, if we're willing to listen. A story of minds awakening, of consciousness expanding, of instinct gradually giving way to imagination. This is their story, and ours. Chapter 3. A world 500,000 years past. Historical context. 500,000 years ago, Earth was a different world. The planet was emerging from an ice age, entering an interglacial period not unlike our own. Global temperatures were rising, ice sheets retreating, forests expanding into what had been tundra. This was the Middle Pleistocene, what geologists call the Chibanian Age, a time of dramatic climate fluctuations when landscapes could transform within a single lifetime. In Africa, vast grasslands stretched across regions now claimed by desert. Europe alternated between temperate forest and open steppe. Asia's geography would be recognizable, though its ecosystems were populated by creatures now long extinct. The world teemed with megafauna, creatures of tremendous size that would seem fantastical to modern eyes. Mammoths and mastodons roamed in great herds. Cave bears, larger than any modern grizzly, dominated the forests of Europe. Saber-toothed cats stalked the grasslands. Giant ground sloths weighing up to 4 tons lumbered through the Americas. Australia harbored marsupial lions and wombats the size of rhinos. This was the world our ancient relatives inhabited. Not modern humans, Homo sapiens wouldn't emerge for another 200,000 years, but other human species that shared our genus Homo. Chief among them was Homo heidelbergensis, named after remains found near Heidelberg, Germany. With brains averaging about 1200 C, smaller than our 1350 C but substantially larger than earlier hominins, they occupied a middle ground in human cognitive evolution. Physically, they were robust, powerfully built. Adults stood 5'9" to 6'1" on average, similar to modern humans but more muscular, with thicker bones and stronger attachments for muscles. Their faces would seem both familiar and alien to us. More pronounced brow ridges shadowed deep-set eyes. Their noses were broad, jaws more projecting than ours, chins less pronounced. Yet look into their eyes, and you might recognize something of yourself. These were not simply primitive brutes, but complex beings navigating a challenging world with intelligence and social sophistication. Homo heidelbergensis is particularly significant because they likely gave rise to both Neanderthals in Europe and the earliest Homo sapiens in Africa. They represent the last common ancestor of our two species, which would later diverge along separate evolutionary paths. What was daily life like for these ancient relatives? The archaeological record offers tantalizing glimpses, though much remains speculative. We know they were accomplished hunters, capable of bringing down large, dangerous prey. At Schöningen in Germany, exquisitely crafted wooden spears dating to 300,000 years ago demonstrate sophisticated weaponry and hunting strategies. They controlled fire, a technology that transformed human existence by providing warmth, protection from predators, and the ability to cook food. Cooking increased the calories available from both plant and animal foods, potentially fueling their larger brains. Their stone tools show remarkable craftsmanship, with symmetric hand axes suggesting an aesthetic sense beyond mere functionality. Some archaeologists argue these tools display imposed form, evidence of conceptual thinking and planning. But what about their inner lives? Could they think symbolically? Did they possess language? Did they create art, music, or engage in spiritual practices? Traditional views held that such capacities emerged much later, with Homo sapiens. But recent discoveries force us to reconsider this assumption. At Terra Amata in France, a site dating to approximately 400,000 years ago, archaeologists found what appears to be a deliberate arrangement of stones. Not tools or discarded fragments, but objects seemingly positioned with purpose, perhaps the earliest known human structure. In Spain, deep within Bruniquel Cave, lies an even more startling discovery. Broken stalagmites arranged in geometric patterns, forming what appears to be a deliberate structure 336,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens existed in Europe. Who created this structure, deep in the darkness where no natural light penetrates? Why venture into the dangerous depths of a cave to arrange stones in patterns? What purpose could this serve beyond the symbolic? The conventional explanation that this represents a practical shelter or windbreak makes little sense in a cave environment. We're left with the possibility that this represents something more profound, symbolic behavior, perhaps even ritual activity. Similarly puzzling are the red ochre pigments found at sites throughout Africa and Eurasia, some dating back 300,000 to 500,000 years. Ochre has no practical purpose beyond its color and symbolic significance. Why would our ancient relatives collect, transport, and process this material unless they attach special meaning to the color red? Unless they were already thinking symbolically. At Bildungsleben in Germany, archaeologists found 370,000-year-old elephant bones with systematic markings, not butchery cuts, but deliberate engravings of parallel lines and cross-hatching. These markings serve no practical purpose. Their meaning is lost to time, but their deliberate nature suggests symbolic intent. Perhaps most compelling are the geometric engravings found on shells from Trinil, Java, dating to approximately 500,000 years ago. These zigzag patterns, carefully incised on freshwater mussel shells, represent the oldest known engravings made by human hands. What's remarkable is not just their age, but their deliberate, non-random nature. The creator didn't simply make random scratches, but carefully executed a consistent geometric pattern, evidence of abstract thinking and symbolic representation. The shells were collected by Eugène Dubois in the 1890s, but the engravings were only noticed in 2014, using modern microscopic analysis. How many other examples of ancient symbolic behavior might we have overlooked, simply because we weren't expecting to find them? This is the central question we're exploring tonight. Have we underestimated the cognitive capabilities of our ancient relatives because of our own biases and preconceptions? Have we been looking at the archaeological record through a lens that presupposes symbolic thinking emerged recently and suddenly, causing us to misinterpret or overlook evidence that contradicts this narrative? As we reconstruct the world of 500,000 years ago, its landscapes, its creatures, its changing climate, we must also attempt to reconstruct the minds that experience this world. Minds not yet fully human, as we understand ourselves, but perhaps more like us than we've imagined. Minds capable not just of survival and adaptation, but potentially of wonder, of curiosity beyond immediate needs, of seeing patterns and meaning in the world around them. The story of human cognitive evolution is being rewritten. The boundary between instinct and imagination, between what we consider animal and human, appears increasingly fluid, increasingly gradual. And in this revised understanding may lie profound insights about who we are, where we came from, and what it truly means to be human. Chapter 4. Whispers in Stone and Bone. First evidence. The evidence for early symbolic thought doesn't announce itself with the dramatic clarity of cave paintings or figurines. It whispers rather than shouts. It requires us to look beyond our preconceptions, to consider subtle markings and patterns that might easily be dismissed as meaningless. Let's begin with the most ancient example, the engraved shells from Trinil, Java. Discovered by Eugène Dubois in the 1890s alongside the remains of Homo erectus, these freshwater mussel shells were initially collected for their paleontological value. For more than a century, they remained in museum collections, their secrets unrevealed. It wasn't until 2014 that researchers using microscopic analysis and modern dating techniques made a startling discovery. One shell bore a geometric zigzag pattern of deliberate engravings. Analysis confirmed the markings were made before fossilization, approximately 500,000 years ago, using a shark tooth as a cutting tool. The pattern required precise control and intention. It served no practical purpose. It wasn't related to opening the shell for food or any other utilitarian function. It appears to be a deliberate geometric design, perhaps the oldest known example of abstract representation. What makes this discovery particularly significant is who created it. Not Homo sapiens, who wouldn't evolve for another 200,000 years, not even Homo heidelbergensis, but most likely Homo erectus, an even earlier hominin species. Homo erectus had smaller brains than later human species, averaging around 1000 cc compared to our 1350 cc. They were traditionally viewed as cognitively simpler than later hominins, capable of making tools but not symbolic expression. Yet here was evidence suggesting they could conceive and execute an abstract geometric pattern, that they could think symbolically 500,000 years ago, challenging our entire timeline of cognitive evolution. Skeptics might argue this is an isolated example, perhaps even a natural phenomenon misinterpreted as human-made. But similar findings have emerged across time and geography, forming a pattern of their own. At Bilzingsleben in Germany, excavations revealed an archaeological site dating to approximately 370,000 years ago. Among the remains were elephant bones bearing systematic markings, sets of parallel lines and cross-hatching that don't correspond to butchery practices. Microscopic analysis confirmed these markings were made deliberately with stone tools. Their purpose remains mysterious, but their non-random, systematic nature suggests symbolic intent. The site also contained what appears to be a deliberately arranged living space, with distinct areas for different activities. This suggests not just practical organization, but conceptual thinking, the ability to conceive of and create structured space. If you're watching from somewhere with ancient archaeological sites nearby, we'd love to know. Comment your location. Our community spans the globe, connected by this shared curiosity about our deepest human origins. Moving forward in time but still predating Homo sapiens, we find evidence of ochre use at multiple sites across Africa and Eurasia. Red ochre, an iron oxide pigment, has been found at sites dating from 300,000 to 500,000 years ago. At Terra Amata in France, ochre pieces were found alongside evidence of fire use dating to approximately 400,000 years ago. Some pieces show signs of grinding, suggesting the pigment was processed for use. What makes ochre particularly significant is that it has no practical application beyond its color. Unlike other materials collected by ancient hominins, it doesn't contribute to survival or tool-making. Its value appears to be purely symbolic. Red ochre continued to hold special significance throughout human prehistory. Later, Homo sapiens would use it in burial rituals, body decoration, and cave art, all explicitly symbolic contexts. Did our pre-sapiens ancestors use it similarly? For body decoration, for marking objects of significance, for ritual purposes? We can only speculate, but the presence of processed ochre suggests symbolic thinking was already present. Perhaps the most enigmatic evidence comes from deep within caves. At Bruniquel Cave in southwestern France, 336,000 years ago, someone ventured more than 1,000 feet into absolute darkness. There they broke stalagmites and arranged the pieces in geometric patterns, creating two large ring-like structures and several smaller arrangements. The structures show signs of having been exposed to fire, perhaps for illumination during their creation. The location is significant. Deep within a cave, far from any natural light, this creation served no practical purpose. It wasn't a shelter or a food preparation area. It required deliberate intention to venture so far into the darkness. Who created this and why? The dating places it firmly in Neanderthal territory, long before Homo sapiens reached Europe. The purpose remains elusive, but the symbolic nature of the creation seems difficult to deny. These discoveries form a pattern across time and space. From Java to Germany to France, from 500,000 to 300,000 years ago, we find evidence suggesting that pre-sapiens hominins were engaging in behaviors that appear symbolic in nature. None of these examples taken alone might be conclusive, but collectively they suggest a pattern of symbolic thinking emerging gradually over hundreds of thousands of years across multiple hominin species. This contradicts the traditional cognitive revolution narrative, which posits that symbolic thinking emerged suddenly around 40,000 years ago with Homo sapiens in Europe. Instead, we see a much longer, more gradual development of symbolic capacities. But there's more. Beyond these physical artifacts, we can infer symbolic thinking from other aspects of ancient hominin behavior. Consider the mastery of fire, achieved at least 400,000 years ago, and possibly much earlier. Fire isn't just a technology. It requires abstract understanding of cause and effect, of transformation, of potential energy. To control fire is to harness a natural force for human purposes, to conceptualize what fire can do before doing it, to imagine possibilities, a fundamental aspect of symbolic thinking. Similarly, the crafting of symmetric stone tools suggests conceptual thought. A perfectly shaped hand axe isn't just functional. It demonstrates the ability to hold an ideal form in mind while executing the physical creation. This is what archaeologists call imposed form, the imposition of a mental template onto physical material. It suggests the capacity for abstract representation, a precursor to symbolic thinking. The hunting strategies evidenced at sites like Schöningen in Germany, where 8 wooden spears dating to 300,000 years ago were discovered, suggest complex planning and social coordination. These weren't simple tools, but sophisticated weapons designed for specific purposes. Their creation required not just technical skill, but the ability to conceptualize future actions, to prepare for events not yet occurring, to imagine scenarios and develop tools specifically for those imagined futures. This capacity to mentally time travel, to remember the past and anticipate the future, underlies all symbolic thinking. Without it, symbolic representation would serve no purpose, as symbols fundamentally connect present actions with past or future meanings. As we examine these fragments of evidence, Enigmatic markings, arranged stones, collected pigments, sophisticated tools, we begin to see outlines of minds capable of meaning-making. Minds not yet fully human as we understand ourselves, but already reaching beyond the immediate and tangible. But this brings us to a profound mystery, a question that has perplexed paleoanthropologists for decades. If symbolic thinking began emerging 500,000 years ago, why don't we see clear evidence of art, ritual, and symbolic culture until much later? Why the long gap between these first tentative expressions and the explosion of cave art, figurines, and burial rituals that appear 40,000 to 70,000 years ago? What was happening during those hundreds of thousands of intervening years? Did symbolic thinking develop gradually, remaining simple and leaving few archaeological traces? Or did it emerge and then fade multiple times, influenced by population sizes, environmental pressures, or other factors we don't yet understand? Recent discoveries suggest something even more intriguing. Perhaps the gap isn't in human cognitive evolution, but in our archaeological detection. Perhaps we simply haven't been looking correctly. New dating techniques applied to previously discovered cave art in Spain suggest that some paintings are at least 65,000 years old, created when Neanderthals, not Homo sapiens, inhabited the region. If confirmed, this would fundamentally alter our understanding of who could create symbolic art. Similarly, shell beads and ochre processing from sites in Africa and the Middle East push evidence of clearly symbolic behavior in Homo sapiens back to at least 120,000 years ago. The gap is closing from both ends. What if there is no gap at all? What if symbolic thinking has been a continuous, gradually developing capacity throughout human evolution, and we've simply failed to recognize its earlier expressions? This brings us to the most provocative possibility of all. What if the capacity for symbolic thought isn't unique to Homo sapiens, but is shared across the human family tree? What if Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo heidelbergensis, and perhaps even Homo erectus all possessed this capacity to varying degrees? What if imagination isn't what makes us uniquely human, but what makes all humans, of whatever species, human? As we stand at this crossroads in understanding human cognitive evolution, we face a profound question. When did that first spark of imagination truly ignite? When did one of our ancestors first look at the world and see not just what was there, but what could be? The traditional answer, 40,000 years ago with Homo sapiens, seems increasingly untenable in light of mounting evidence. But if not then, when? And if not exclusively with our species, with whom? The answer may lie in subtle markings made 500,000 years ago, in geometric patterns etched on shell and bone, in pigments collected for their color rather than utility, in stones arranged in darkness for purposes we can only imagine. These fragments speak to us across vast stretches of time, whispering of minds awakening to symbolic possibility, of the long, gradual dawn of human imagination. And as we piece together this evidence, we approach a revolutionary conclusion. The day instinct became imagination wasn't a day at all. It was a journey spanning hundreds of thousands of years, involving multiple human species, unfolding gradually across continents and millennia. A journey that continues even now as we struggle to understand our cognitive origins. As we attempt to trace the first stirrings of that most human of capacities, the ability to create meaning beyond the literal, to imagine, to dream. What would it mean if we discovered definitive evidence that symbolic thought emerged not 40,000, but 500,000 years ago? If we confirmed that multiple human species shared this capacity, the implications would transform our understanding not just of human evolution, but of consciousness itself, of how minds emerge from matter, of what it truly means to be human. This is where our investigation leads us, to the brink of a profound reconsideration of human cognitive evolution, to evidence that suggests symbolic thought may be far older and shared far more widely across the human family than we've ever imagined. Chapter 5. The Cognitive Puzzle. Contradictions in the Timeline. As we venture deeper into this investigation, we encounter a curious pattern in the archaeological record, a pattern of contradictions that challenges our understanding of cognitive evolution. Evidence that doesn't fit neatly into the conventional narrative of when and how human imagination emerged. Consider the site of Kathu Pan in South Africa. Here, archaeologists discovered stone points dating to approximately 500,000 years ago, points that show signs of having been attached to wooden shafts as spears. These aren't simple tools but compound technologies, multiple materials combined to create something greater than the sum of their parts. The creation of such weapons requires not just technical skill, but conceptual thinking about how different materials interact. More significantly, microscopic analysis reveals these points were hafted with a mixture of ochre, plant gum, and possibly animal fat, an early adhesive requiring precise preparation. The recipe had to be conceived before execution, suggesting abstract thinking and planning. This technological sophistication appears hundreds of thousands of years before we traditionally place the emergence of complex cognition. How do we explain this contradiction? Perhaps more puzzling still is evidence from Pinnacle Point, South Africa, where early humans collected and processed red ochre as far back as 164,000 years ago. They didn't simply gather naturally occurring pigment. They selectively sought specific types and heat-treated them to enhance their properties. This represents a multi-step process requiring forward planning and understanding of material transformation. They had to know, before applying heat, what effect it would have, suggesting not just trial and error, but conceptual understanding. Why invest such effort in a material with no practical survival value? The most plausible explanation remains symbolic use, for body decoration, object marking, or ritual purposes. Yet this occurs long before we traditionally place the emergence of symbolic behavior. Even more challenging to conventional timelines is the site of Blombos Cave in South Africa. Here, archaeologists discovered pieces of ochre bearing geometric engravings, crosshatches, and parallel lines carefully incised, dating to 73,000 years ago. These aren't random scratches, but deliberate patterns requiring planning and precise execution. They appear on multiple pieces, suggesting shared symbolic meaning within the community that created them. Nearby, in the same archaeological context, researchers found shell beads, perforated and showing signs of stringing, presumably as jewelry. The shells come from a single species, were consistently perforated in the same location, and show wear patterns indicating they were strung together. This represents not just decoration, but social signaling, communicating identity or status through symbolic objects. All occurring tens of thousands of years before the supposed creative explosion in Europe around 40,000 years ago. These findings force us to confront a significant contradiction. Either symbolic behavior emerged much earlier than traditionally thought, or it emerged multiple times independently across human evolution. Neither option fits neatly with conventional narratives, but the contradictions extend beyond Africa. In Europe, evidence suggests Neanderthals were engaging in behaviors we'd typically associate with symbolic thinking long before Homo sapiens arrived on the continent. At sites throughout Spain, cave paintings have recently been redated using uranium-thorium techniques. The results indicate some are at least 65,000 years old, created when only Neanderthals inhabited Europe. These include geometric symbols, handprints, and simple representations of animals. Not as elaborate as later Homo sapiens cave art, perhaps, but undeniably symbolic, representing one thing with another. Similarly, in Italy's Fumane cave, researchers discovered what appears to be a stone pendant, deliberately perforated, in Neanderthal archaeological contexts dating to approximately 45,000 years ago. This predates confirmed Homo sapiens presence in the region. We've also found evidence that Neanderthals buried their dead, sometimes with what appear to be grave goods. At La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, a Neanderthal burial dating to approximately 50,000 years ago contained tools and animal bones arranged around the body. Burial itself suggests conceptual thinking about death, perhaps even beliefs about an afterlife. The inclusion of objects with the deceased implies symbolic meaning attached to both the items and the act of interment. These discoveries present a profound contradiction to the narrative that symbolic thinking emerged suddenly with Homo sapiens in Europe. They suggest instead that our evolutionary cousins possessed cognitive capacities remarkably similar to our own. But perhaps the most perplexing contradiction comes from Asia, where the archaeological record reveals surprising complexity among hominin species traditionally considered cognitively simple. Species like Homo erectus and Homo floresiensis, the hobbits of Indonesia. On the Indonesian island of Flores, stone tools dating to 840,000 years ago have been discovered in geological contexts, suggesting sea crossing was required to reach the island. The implication is startling. Homo erectus may have built watercraft capable of crossing open water. Such technological achievement requires not just practical skills but considerable abstract thinking, conceptualizing a vessel, planning its construction, navigating across water to an unseen destination. All suggesting cognitive capabilities far beyond what we've traditionally attributed to Homo erectus. Even more recently, at Calao Cave in the Philippines, a new hominin species named Homo luzonensis was discovered alongside stone tools dating to approximately 67,000 years ago. Like Flores, Luzon is an island that would have required sea crossing to reach. How many intelligent hominin species have we underestimated? How many were capable of symbolic thought in ways we've failed to recognize because their expressions differ from our own? These contradictions force us to reconsider our entire framework for understanding cognitive evolution. If multiple human species across Africa, Europe, and Asia were all engaging in behaviors that suggest symbolic thinking, our conventional timeline collapses. The neat story of symbolic thought emerging suddenly with Homo sapiens gives way to something messier, but perhaps more accurate, a gradual multi-regional development of cognitive capabilities across the human family tree. A story not of sudden revolution, but of gradual awakening. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. What do you think happened? Did symbolic thinking emerge once with our species, or gradually across multiple human species over hundreds of thousands of years? Drop your theories in the comments below. But contradictions in the archaeological record are only part of the puzzle. We also encounter anomalies, findings so unexpected, so out of place in our chronology, that they've often been dismissed or overlooked because they don't fit prevailing theories. At Wonderwerk Cave in South Africa, evidence suggests controlled use of fire dating back 1 million years ago. Not just opportunistic use of naturally occurring flames, but deliberate maintenance of hearths. Fire control represents a profound cognitive leap, the ability to maintain and manipulate a natural force for human purposes. It requires understanding cause and effect, anticipating needs, and conceptualizing transformation, all aspects of abstract thinking. Yet this occurs hundreds of thousands of years before we typically place the emergence of complex cognition. How do we reconcile this anomaly with conventional timelines? Similarly anomalous are the stone tools from Lomekwi, Kenya, dating to 3.3 million years ago, 700,000 years older than previously known tools and predating the genus Homo entirely. These weren't created by humans as we define them, but by earlier Australopithecines. If toolmaking, which requires conceptual planning and visualization of end products, extends beyond our genus, how confident can we be about restricting symbolic thinking to recent Homo sapiens? Where do we really draw the line between instinct and imagination? Another perplexing anomaly appears at Cima de los Huesos in Spain. Here, deep within a cave, archaeologists discovered the remains of at least 28 individuals dating to approximately 430,000 years ago, most likely early Neanderthals or their immediate ancestors. The location suggests deliberate disposal of the dead, not accidental deaths or predator accumulation. More startlingly, among these remains was found a single, exquisitely crafted hand axe made of red-hued quartzite, apparently deposited deliberately with the bodies. This hand axe, the only tool found among the remains, appears to be a deliberate offering. A symbolic object placed with the dead, suggesting conceptual thinking about death and perhaps ritual behavior nearly 500,000 years ago. These anomalies, these contradictions in the archaeological record, form a pattern that becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss. They point toward a fundamentally different understanding of human cognitive evolution than the one we've traditionally embraced. They suggest not a sudden cognitive revolution, but a long gradual development spanning hundreds of thousands of years and multiple human species. A story not of human exceptionalism, but of shared cognitive heritage across the human family tree. As we continue our exploration, we'll examine even more puzzling evidence, myths and legends that hint at ancient knowledge, artifacts that seem out of place in time. And we'll ask what these might reveal about the true timeline of human imagination. The contradictions we've explored suggest we've been looking at human cognitive evolution through too narrow a lens, that we've underestimated our ancient relatives and oversimplified a complex, nuanced process of cognitive development. Perhaps it's time to reimagine our past, to consider that the spark of imagination may have ignited not in a sudden blaze 40,000 years ago, but in countless small flames across hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. Chapter 6. Echoes Across Time. Myths and Outlier Evidence. The archaeological record, with its contradictions and anomalies, tells only part of our story. Another avenue of inquiry, more speculative but potentially revealing, lies in the myths and legends that have survived from deep antiquity. These narratives, passed down through countless generations, may contain echoes of actual events and interactions from times before written history. They might preserve memories of cognitive transitions, moments when human understanding fundamentally shifted. Consider the ubiquitous theft of fire myths found across cultures worldwide. From Prometheus in Greek mythology, to Maui in Polynesian legends, to Raven in indigenous North American stories, countless traditions tell of a trickster figure who steals fire for humanity. These myths share remarkable similarities despite emerging in geographically distant regions. They all portray fire not as a gradually learned technology, but as a transformative gift that fundamentally changed human existence. Could these widespread myths preserve an ancient memory of the actual acquisition of fire control? A cognitive leap so profound that it echoed through generations as a story of transformation rather than gradual discovery. If so, the mythic framing is telling. Fire isn't portrayed as a technological innovation, but as a boundary-crossing event that made humans more than they were before, a perfect metaphorical encapsulation of the transition from instinctual to imaginative thought. Similarly intriguing are widespread creation myths involving divine beings who shape humans from clay or earth. These narratives appear across continents and cultures, from the biblical Adam to the Prometheus-created humans of Greek mythology, to similar stories in China, Africa, and the Americas. Beyond their theological significance, these myths share a fundamental conceptual framework, the idea of shaping material into a predetermined form. The divine creators first imagine what they will create, then manipulate matter to match that mental image. This is precisely the cognitive process involved in creating a stone tool, a wooden spear, or a symbolic engraving. First, conceptualize the end product. Then, impose that mental template onto physical material. Could these creation myths reflect humanity's dawning awareness of our own creative capacity? A metaphorical projection of our ability to conceptualize and then manifest, to imagine and then create. Even more provocative are myths concerning encounters with other kinds of human-like beings. Legends of wild men, forest dwellers, and other near-human entities appear across cultures, often described as physically stronger than modern humans, but lacking certain human qualities. In Chinese mythology, we find the Yeren, wild mountain dwellers with primitive technology. European folklore speaks of woodwoses, forest beings between animals and humans. Australia has the Yowie, Indonesia the Orang Pendek. These legends have traditionally been interpreted as cultural memories of encounters with animals, or as cautionary tales about wilderness dangers. But another possibility exists. Could they preserve memories of encounters with other hominin species? We now know that Homo sapiens coexisted with Neanderthals and Denisovans for millennia. On the island of Flores, Homo floresiensis may have survived until 50,000 years ago, potentially overlapping with modern human arrival. Could these myths preserve distant memories of actual encounters between different human species, between populations with different cognitive capabilities and cultural expressions? If so, they might offer insights into how ancient Homo sapiens perceived their evolutionary cousins, not as animals, but as beings recognizably similar to themselves, yet fundamentally different in key aspects. Beings who were human-like, but not fully human in the way they understood themselves to be. Beyond myths, we find puzzling archaeological outliers, artifacts and sites so anomalous they're often marginalized in mainstream discussions of cognitive evolution. Yet they may offer crucial insights into ancient symbolic capabilities. Consider the Venus of Barakat Ram, discovered in the Golan Heights. This small piece of volcanic tuff bears modifications that appear to accentuate its natural human-like shape, potentially representing a female figure. Dating to between 280,000 and 250,000 years ago, it predates the earliest known figurative art by more than 200,000 years. If it represents an intentionally modified figurine rather than a natural object, it would dramatically recalibrate our timeline of symbolic expression. Microscopic analysis suggests the grooves defining the neck were indeed created or enhanced by human tools. But debate continues. Was this deliberate representation or merely functional modification of a natural object? Similar questions surround the Venus of Tantan discovered in Morocco. Dating to between 500,000 and 300,000 years ago, this quartzite piece appears to have natural anthropomorphic features enhanced by deliberate human modification. Traces of red pigment have been found on its surface, suggesting it may have been colored, a further indication of symbolic intent. Yet like the Barakat Ram Venus, it remains controversial, inhabiting an uncertain space between natural object and deliberate representation. What makes these potential figurines so significant is their age. If they indeed represent intentional representational art, they would push symbolic expression back hundreds of thousands of years earlier than conventionally accepted. They would suggest that beings we've traditionally considered cognitively simple, perhaps Homo heidelbergensis or even Homo erectus, were capable of abstract representation. Of seeing one thing, a piece of stone, and transforming it to represent another, a human figure. Equally perplexing are geometric markings found on bones from multiple sites across Africa, Europe, and Asia. At Bilsingsleben in Germany, 370,000-year-old elephant bones bear systematic markings, parallel lines and cross-hatches made with stone tools. Similar markings appear on a 120,000-year-old ox rib from Pêche de la Zay in France and on bones from Clayses River mouth in South Africa, dating to approximately 100,000 years ago. These aren't random scratches, but deliberate, systematic patterns. What do these markings represent? Are they merely decorative counting systems, notations of lunar cycles, or something else entirely? Symbolic expressions whose meaning is lost to time. Whatever their purpose, they suggest a capacity for abstract representation long before we traditionally place the emergence of symbolic thought. They hint at minds already capable of creating meaning beyond the immediately functional. If symbolic thinking was indeed present so early in our evolutionary history, why has it been so difficult to recognize in the archaeological record? One answer may lie in preservation bias, the simple fact that organic materials rarely survive from such ancient periods. If early symbolic expression primarily involved body decoration, wooden objects, or other perishable materials, the archaeological record would preserve only a tiny fraction of what once existed. We might be judging ancient cognitive capabilities based on a severely limited sample. Another consideration is that we may be looking for the wrong expressions of symbolic thinking. We've sought cave paintings and figurines, the symbolic expressions familiar from later periods, while overlooking other, earlier forms of abstract representation. The arranged stones at Brunikel Cave, the geometric engravings on bones and shells, the careful collection and processing of ochre. These may represent symbolic thinking expressed in ways different from, but no less significant than later figurative art. So many wonderful insights have been shared in the comments about early human cognition. If you have a particular favorite ancient mystery or archaeological site, we'd love to hear about it. Our community's collective curiosity helps shape these explorations. Perhaps most provocatively, certain archaeological finds suggest capabilities so advanced they seem out of place in conventional timelines. The 77,000-year-old piece of engraved ochre from Blombos Cave in South Africa bears a complex geometric design requiring not just technical skill, but aesthetic sensibility. This isn't mere decoration, but complex symbolic expression, a deliberate creation of meaning through abstract pattern. Yet it appears tens of thousands of years before the supposed cognitive revolution in Europe. Similarly, the discovery of musical instruments, flutes made from bird bones, at multiple European sites dating to approximately 40,000 years ago, suggests not just technical capability, but aesthetic expression. Music is inherently symbolic, representing emotional states through sound. But did musical expression really begin so suddenly, with no precursors? Or are we missing earlier, simpler instruments that haven't survived in the archaeological record? Some researchers suggest that intentionally shaped or selected stone objects found at various sites might have served as lithophones, stone instruments struck to produce specific tones. Such objects would preserve far better than wooden or bone instruments, potentially offering glimpses into ancient musical expression. As we examine these myths and archaeological outliers, a pattern emerges. Each piece of evidence viewed in isolation might be dismissed as anomalous or ambiguous. But collectively, they suggest a fundamentally different timeline for symbolic thought than the one we've traditionally accepted. They point toward cognitive capabilities far older than 40,000 years, distributed across multiple human species rather than unique to Homo sapiens. They suggest a gradual awakening of imagination spanning hundreds of thousands of years rather than a sudden revolution. This alternative narrative challenges not just our understanding of when symbolic thinking emerged, but our conception of what makes us human. If imagination isn't uniquely ours, but a shared heritage across the human family tree, how do we define our species' place in nature? As we continue our exploration, we'll consider what these findings might mean for our understanding of consciousness itself. For if symbolic thought emerged gradually across deep time, perhaps consciousness too exists on a spectrum, rather than as a binary state. The implications extend far beyond anthropology or archaeology. They touch on philosophy, psychology, and our fundamental understanding of mind itself, of how awareness and imagination emerge from matter. These echoes across time, in myths, in enigmatic artifacts, in puzzling patterns etched on bone and shell, speak to us of minds awakening, of beings not yet fully human as we understand ourselves, but already reaching beyond instinct toward imagination. Chapter 7. Beyond the Veil, Stakes and Deeper Implications. As we delve deeper into this investigation, the stakes grow increasingly profound. We're no longer simply questioning when symbolic thought emerged, but challenging fundamental assumptions about human nature and consciousness itself. If symbolic thinking, the ability to represent one thing with another, to create meaning beyond the literal, emerged not 40,000 but 500,000 years ago, our entire understanding of human cognitive evolution requires revision. And with it, our conception of what makes us human. This isn't merely an academic question. It strikes at the heart of how we understand ourselves, our place in nature, and our relationship to other species, both living and extinct. The traditional narrative of human exceptionalism rests on the belief that symbolic thought represents a cognitive Rubicon, a threshold crossed only by our species in the relatively recent past. This belief has justified our sense of separation from and dominance over the natural world. But what if this narrative is wrong? What if the capacity for imagination isn't what makes us uniquely human, but what makes all humans, of whatever species, human? What if Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo heidelbergensis, and perhaps even Homo erectus all possessed this capacity to varying degrees? What if symbolic thinking isn't a binary state, present or absent, but exists on a spectrum of complexity? This alternative understanding would fundamentally transform our relationship to our extinct relatives, not as primitive precursors or evolutionary dead ends, but as alternative expressions of the human capacity for imagination. Each hominin species may have developed different forms of symbolic expression, different ways of creating and communicating meaning. Ways we might not recognize because they differ from our own symbolic traditions. Consider the profound implications of recent genetic evidence. We now know that many modern humans carry Neanderthal DNA, some up to 4%, indicating successful interbreeding between our species. East Asian and Oceanic populations also carry Denisovan DNA. African populations show genetic evidence of interbreeding with yet other archaic human species whose fossils we haven't yet discovered. This genetic evidence tells us something remarkable. Our ancestors recognized these other human species as suitable mates. They saw them not as animals, but as beings like themselves, different perhaps, but fundamentally similar. What might this tell us about cognitive similarities between human species, about shared capacities for symbolic thought, for communication, for imagination? The implications extend further still. If symbolic thinking emerged gradually, across hundreds of thousands of years rather than suddenly, we must reconsider how consciousness itself developed. The conventional view treats consciousness, particularly self-awareness and the capacity for abstract thought, as a relatively recent and uniquely human phenomenon, a quantum leap that separated us from all other beings. But the evidence we've examined suggests a different story, one of gradual cognitive evolution across multiple species over vast spans of time. This implies that consciousness too may exist on a spectrum rather than as a binary state. If this is true, the boundary between human and animal minds becomes less absolute, more permeable. We might need to consider that other intelligent species, both extinct hominins and living non-human animals, possess forms of consciousness more similar to our own than we've traditionally acknowledged. Great apes create and use tools, recognize themselves in mirrors, and demonstrate rudimentary symbolic capabilities. Elephants appear to mourn their dead. Corvids solve complex problems requiring abstract thinking. Dolphins recognize themselves as individuals and communicate with sophisticated vocalization systems. Might these capabilities represent not failed attempts to reach human-level consciousness, but alternative expressions of mind? Different evolutionary paths toward awareness and understanding. If symbolic thought began emerging 500,000 years ago across multiple hominin species, we must also reconsider the relationship between biology and culture in human evolution. The conventional narrative emphasizes biological evolution, particularly brain size increase, as the primary driver of cognitive development. But what if cultural evolution played a more significant role than we've recognized? What if symbolic thinking emerged not primarily through genetic changes, but through cumulative cultural innovations transmitted across generations? Recent theoretical work suggests that once early forms of symbolic communication developed, they would create selective pressures favoring enhanced symbolic capabilities. A feedback loop between culture and biology driving cognitive evolution. This would explain why multiple hominin species appear to have developed symbolic capabilities independently, not through shared genetics, but through parallel cultural evolution in response to similar environmental challenges. A case of convergent cognitive evolution. The stakes extend beyond our understanding of the past to our conception of the future. If symbolic thinking emerged gradually through gene-culture co-evolution rather than suddenly through genetic mutation, what might this tell us about the continued evolution of human consciousness? Might we be in the midst of another cognitive transition, driven not by biological evolution, but by cultural and technological changes. Could our increasing integration with technology be creating new forms of symbolic thought, new expressions of consciousness? Some theorists suggest that writing, mathematics, and now digital technology represent cognitive extensions, tools that fundamentally transform how we think, not just what we can do. External symbolic systems that become internalized, creating new cognitive capabilities. If early symbolic thinking emerged through the externalization of internal mental states, through marks on bone or shell, arrangements of stones, applications of pigment, might our current externalization of cognition through digital technology represent a similar transition? These questions carry profound philosophical implications. If consciousness evolved gradually across species and continues to evolve through cultural and technological innovation, what does this tell us about the nature of mind itself? Is consciousness an emergent property of sufficiently complex neural networks? A fundamental aspect of reality that becomes more expressed as organisms develop more sophisticated ways of interacting with their environment. Something else entirely. Is consciousness an emergent property of sufficiently complex neural networks? A fundamental aspect of reality that becomes more expressed as organisms develop more sophisticated ways of interacting with their environment. Something else entirely. The implications extend to ethics as well. If other beings, both extinct human species and living non-human animals, possess forms of consciousness more similar to our own than we've traditionally acknowledged, what responsibilities might we have toward them? How should we treat the remains of extinct human species? As archaeological specimens, or as something more akin to human remains deserving of special consideration? What ethical obligations might we have toward highly intelligent non-human animals if they possess rudimentary forms of symbolic consciousness? How might recognition of cognitive continuity across species affect our treatment of other beings? As we approach the climax of our investigation, we must confront these deeper questions. For what began as an inquiry into the origins of symbolic thought has become an exploration of consciousness itself. We're no longer simply asking when instinct became imagination, but what imagination truly is, how it emerges from neural activity, how it exists across species, how it continues to evolve. The evidence we've examined, from enigmatic markings on ancient bones to sophisticated technological achievements predating Homo sapiens, suggests we've underestimated the cognitive capabilities of our evolutionary relatives. We've drawn too sharp a line between ourselves and them, but recent discoveries force us to reconsider. The geometric engravings from Java dating to 500,000 years ago, the carefully arranged stones deep within Bruniquel Cave from 336,000 years ago, the ochre processing at Pinnacle Point 164,000 years ago. These findings, scattered across time and geography, form a pattern that becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss. They suggest symbolic thinking isn't unique to Homo sapiens, but a shared heritage across the human family tree. What might this mean for our understanding of those extinct human species, for Neanderthals whose DNA many of us still carry, for Denisovans, known only from fragmentary remains, yet whose genetic legacy persists in modern populations? Were they capable of art, of spiritual belief, of contemplating their own existence? Did they tell stories around their fires, create music, wonder at the stars? The conventional answer has been no, or at least not in ways comparable to modern humans. But the evidence we've explored suggests this answer may reflect our biases more than their actual capabilities. Perhaps they expressed symbolic thinking in ways different from our own, ways we've failed to recognize because we've been looking for expressions familiar to us. Cave paintings and figurines rather than arranged stones, engraved bones, or collected pigments. Or perhaps the apparent explosion of symbolic expression 40,000 years ago represents not the first emergence of such capabilities, but their acceleration, a quantitative increase rather than a qualitative leap. More complex expressions of capacities already present for hundreds of thousands of years. As we stand at this crossroads in understanding human cognitive evolution, we face a profound choice. Do we cling to the conventional narrative of human exceptionalism, with symbolic thought as our unique defining feature? Or do we embrace a more nuanced understanding, one that sees imagination as an ancient capacity shared across the human family tree, emerging gradually over vast spans of time? One that recognizes consciousness itself as existing on a spectrum rather than as a binary state. This choice isn't merely academic. It shapes how we understand ourselves, our place in nature, and our relationships to other beings, both living and extinct. It may even shape our future. For if symbolic thinking emerged through gene-culture co-evolution, spanning hundreds of thousands of years, we might still be in the midst of this process, still becoming what we will be. As we prepare to examine the final and most compelling evidence in our investigation, we're approaching not just conclusions about human cognitive evolution, but insights into the nature of mind itself, into how consciousness emerges and evolves, into what it truly means to be human. The stakes couldn't be higher. For what began as an inquiry into ancient markings on bone and shell has become an exploration of the most profound mystery of all, the emergence of mind from matter, of imagination from instinct, of meaning from mere existence. This isn't just about when our ancestors began to think symbolically. It's about understanding consciousness itself, the very thing that allows us to contemplate these questions, to wonder about our origins, to imagine possibilities beyond the immediate and tangible. And as we'll discover in our final chapters, the answer may be more remarkable and more humbling than we ever imagined. Chapter 8. Convergence and divergence, competing theories. As we approach the climax of our investigation, we must consider the competing theories that attempt to explain the origins of symbolic thought. Each offers a different perspective on when and how our ancestors crossed the threshold from instinct to imagination. The first and most established theory, what we might call the cognitive revolution model, places the emergence of symbolic thinking relatively recently, around 40,000, 70,000 years ago. This coincides with the explosion of cave art, figurines, and other unambiguously symbolic artifacts in Europe. According to this theory, championed by scholars like Yuval Noah Harari, a genetic mutation occurred in Homo sapiens that fundamentally rewired our brains. This mutation enabled abstract thinking, complex language, and symbolic representation, launching us into an entirely new cognitive realm. This theory is compelling in its simplicity and appears supported by the archaeological record's sudden abundance of symbolic artifacts around this time. It provides a clear explanation for why humans, unlike other species, developed complex culture, technology, and civilization. But it struggles to account for the earlier evidence we've examined: the engravings on shells from 500,000 years ago, the geometric patterns on bones from 370,000 years ago, the arranged stones from 336,000 years ago. It requires dismissing or downplaying this evidence. It also creates an implausibly sharp cognitive divide between Homo sapiens and other human species like Neanderthals, whom genetic evidence suggests interbred successfully with our ancestors. Could beings so cognitively different recognize each other as suitable mates? The second major theory, which we might call the gradual emergence model, proposes that symbolic thinking developed incrementally over hundreds of thousands of years. This perspective, advanced by scholars like Ian Davidson and William Noble, sees symbolism evolving through successive stages rather than appearing suddenly. In this view, simple symbolic behaviors, like collecting colorful objects or marking surfaces with patterns, appeared first. These laid cognitive foundations for later, more complex symbolic expressions like representational art and religious ritual. This theory better accommodates the earlier evidence we've examined and aligns with what we know about evolution generally, that complex traits typically develop through gradual modifications rather than sudden leaps. It also allows for cognitive continuity across human species, but it too has weaknesses. It struggles to explain the apparent acceleration of symbolic behavior around 40,000 years ago, the proliferation of cave art, figurines, and other complex symbolic expressions that seem to appear relatively suddenly. If symbolic thinking had been developing gradually for hundreds of thousands of years, why this dramatic intensification at that particular moment? What triggered the explosion of expressivity we see in the Upper Paleolithic? This brings us to the third major theory, the cultural tipping point model. This perspective, advocated by researchers like Peter Richardson and Robert Boyd, suggests that symbolic capabilities emerged through gene-culture co-evolution rather than genetic mutation alone. According to this theory, early humans possessed the neural capacity for symbolic thought long before they fully expressed it. What changed around 40,000 years ago wasn't our brains, but our social and cultural contexts. As human populations grew and social networks expanded, cultural innovations could be preserved and transmitted more reliably. Ideas and techniques no longer disappeared when small groups died out. They spread through increasingly dense networks of human connection. This created a feedback loop. More people meant more innovations. More innovations supported larger populations. Larger populations preserved more innovations. Eventually, this process reached a tipping point where symbolic culture could flourish exponentially. This theory accommodates both the early evidence of symbolic behavior and the later acceleration. It explains why similar cognitive capabilities might emerge independently in different human species facing similar environmental and social challenges. But which theory best explains the evidence? Let's evaluate them against what we've discovered. The cognitive revolution theory struggles with the mounting evidence of early symbolic behavior. The engravings from Java, the arranged stones at Bruniquel Cave, the processed ochre at multiple sites all suggest symbolic thinking long before 40,000 years ago. It also fails to account for evidence of similar capabilities in Neanderthals and possibly other human species. If symbolic thinking resulted from a mutation unique to Homo sapiens, how do we explain Neanderthal cave art, jewelry, and apparent ritual practices? The gradual emergence theory better accommodates this early evidence, but faces its own challenges. If symbolic capabilities developed gradually over hundreds of thousands of years, why don't we see a smoother progression of increasingly complex symbolic artifacts throughout the archaeological record? Instead, we see tantalizing glimpses of early symbolic behavior, followed by apparent gaps, then a dramatic proliferation around 40,000 years ago. This irregular pattern requires explanation. The cultural tipping point theory addresses these inconsistencies by distinguishing between cognitive capacity and cultural expression. It suggests that the neural foundations for symbolic thought emerged gradually, but their cultural manifestations depended on social and demographic factors. This would explain why we see early examples of symbolic behavior that don't immediately lead to an explosion of symbolic culture. Small, isolated populations might develop symbolic practices that disappear without being widely transmitted, creating the gaps we observe in the archaeological record. It would also explain why multiple human species independently developed symbolic behaviors, not through shared genetics, but through parallel cultural evolution in response to similar environmental challenges. A case of convergent cognitive development. When population densities, social networks, and cultural transmission systems reached a critical threshold around 40,000 years ago, symbolic culture could flourish exponentially. Not because humans suddenly gained new cognitive capacities, but because existing capacities found unprecedented opportunities for expression and transmission. This theory aligns with recent understandings of how culture and biology interact in human evolution. Rather than biological evolution driving cultural development or vice versa, they co-evolve in complex feedback loops. Early symbolic behaviors would create selective pressures favoring enhanced symbolic capabilities. Enhanced capabilities would enable more complex symbolic behaviors. These would further intensify selection for symbolic cognition. A self-reinforcing cycle spanning hundreds of thousands of years, but all three theories face a fundamental challenge. The archaeological record is incomplete. Preservation bias means we see only a tiny fraction of what once existed, and what survives is predominantly non-perishable material. If early symbolic expression primarily involved body decoration, wooden objects, or other organic materials, almost all evidence would have disappeared. We might be judging ancient cognitive capabilities based on an extraordinarily limited sample. Modern humans express symbolism constantly, through clothing, hairstyles, jewelry, tattoos, dance, music, verbal storytelling, yet most of these expressions leave no archaeological trace. Might our ancient relatives have done the same, leaving little evidence for us to find? As we weigh these competing theories, we must acknowledge that each contains elements of truth. Symbolic thinking likely did emerge gradually across hundreds of thousands of years, accelerated through gene-culture coevolution, and reached a tipping point when demographic and social conditions permitted exponential cultural innovation. The question isn't which theory is correct, but how they integrate to explain the complex, multifaceted process through which instinct became imagination. A process spanning vast stretches of time, involving multiple human species, unfolding differently across diverse geographic and ecological contexts. In our next chapter, we'll explore how recent scientific discoveries, from genetics to neuroscience to computational modeling, are transforming our understanding of this process, and how they're revealing paradoxes that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about human cognitive evolution. Chapter 9. The New Cognitive Archaeology, Science and Paradox. Recent scientific advances across multiple disciplines are revolutionizing our understanding of human cognitive evolution. From paleogenetics to computational neuroscience to experimental archaeology, new methodologies are providing unprecedented insights into when and how our capacity for symbolic thought emerged. Perhaps most significant is the revolution in ancient DNA analysis. In 2010, scientists published the first draft of the Neanderthal genome, revealing that non-African modern humans carry 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA, clear evidence of interbreeding between our species. Subsequent analysis of Denisovan remains yielded similar findings, with some Asian and oceanic populations carrying up to 6% Denisovan DNA. More recently, genetic studies of African populations have revealed DNA from yet other archaic human species whose fossils we haven't yet discovered. These findings create a profound paradox for the cognitive revolution theory. If Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other archaic humans were cognitively so different from Homo sapiens that they lacked symbolic thinking, why did our ancestors recognize them as suitable mates? Successful interbreeding suggests substantial cognitive compatibility. Our ancestors didn't see these other human species as fundamentally different beings, but as potential partners with whom they could communicate and form relationships. This genetic evidence supports the gradual emergence theory, suggesting cognitive continuity across human species rather than a sudden revolution unique to Homo sapiens. It implies shared capacity for symbolic thought, albeit perhaps expressed differently across species. Equally transformative are advances in neuroimaging and computational modeling of brain evolution. By comparing modern human brains with those of great apes and applying these insights to fossil endocasts, researchers can identify neural structures associated with symbolic thinking. These studies reveal that brain structures supporting symbolic cognition, particularly in the prefrontal cortex and parietal regions, began expanding in Homo habilis 2 million years ago and continued developing through successive hominin species. The neural foundations for symbolic thought have deep evolutionary roots. Moreover, computational models suggest that once these neural foundations were established, relatively small subsequent changes could produce dramatic cognitive effects through complex interactions within the brain's networks. A 10% increase in certain neural pathways might yield a 100% improvement in symbolic processing capacity. This creates another paradox. The cognitive architecture for symbolic thought may have been present long before we see clear archaeological evidence of symbolic behavior. Why this disconnect between capability and expression? The answer may lie in understanding symbolic thinking, not as a single capacity, but as a spectrum of related abilities developing at different rates. The capacity to recognize symbolic relationships might emerge before the capacity to create them. The ability to use symbols in private thought might precede using them for social communication. Recent experiments with great apes demonstrate this complexity. Chimpanzees, bonobos, and orangutans can learn to use abstract symbols, understand iconic representations, and even create simple symbolic communications when properly trained. They don't spontaneously develop complex symbolic systems like human language or art. But their abilities suggest that precursors to symbolic thinking exist in species that diverged from our lineage 6 to 7 million years ago. If great apes possess rudimentary symbolic capabilities, it seems implausible that Neanderthals and other archaic humans, whose brains were larger than ours in some regions, would lack them entirely. The cognitive gap between humans and other species appears increasingly as a matter of degree rather than kind. This creates yet another paradox. If the neural foundations for symbolic thinking evolved gradually over millions of years, with important precursors present even in great apes, why did complex symbolic culture emerge relatively suddenly in the archaeological record? The answer may lie in understanding the relationship between individual cognitive capabilities and collective cultural systems. An individual's capacity for symbolic thought might remain latent without social contexts that nurture and develop it. Recent computational models of cultural evolution support this hypothesis. These models show that symbolic innovations require not just individual creativity, but effective mechanisms for preserving and transmitting those innovations across generations. In small, isolated populations, innovations frequently disappear before they can spread. When population density increases and social networks expand, innovations persist longer and combine more frequently, creating exponential cultural growth. This explains a key paradox in the archaeological record: why we see tantalizing glimpses of early symbolic behavior that don't immediately lead to an explosion of symbolic culture. The cognitive capacity was present, but demographic and social conditions weren't yet conducive to sustained cultural accumulation. When these conditions finally aligned around 40,000 years ago, with increased population density, expanded trade networks, and possibly new forms of social organization, symbolic culture could flourish exponentially. Not because humans suddenly gained new cognitive capacities, but because existing capacities found unprecedented opportunities for expression and transmission. Experimental archaeology provides further insights by recreating ancient technologies and practices. These experiments reveal the cognitive demands of activities like crafting stone tools, controlling fire, or creating pigments, all requiring planning, mental simulation, and abstract thinking. The sophisticated stone tools created by Homo heidelbergensis 500,000 years ago required conceptualizing a final product, planning multiple production stages, and continuously adjusting techniques based on material properties. These are hallmarks of abstract thinking, holding mental representations and manipulating them symbolically. Fire maintenance similarly requires understanding cause-effect relationships across time, gathering appropriate materials before they're needed, regulating oxygen flow, and anticipating how different fuels will burn. This represents rudimentary symbolic thinking about transformations and future states. We've been so fascinated by your comments. What amazes you most about early human cognition? Let us know below. Your perspective adds dimensions to this exploration of our shared ancestral journey. Perhaps most revelatory are new dating techniques that have transformed our understanding of when symbolic artifacts first appeared. Uranium-thorium dating of cave art in Spain and Indonesia has pushed the earliest known representational art back to at least 65,000 years ago, created when only Neanderthals inhabited Europe and Homo sapiens had not yet reached Indonesia. These findings create a profound paradox for traditional timelines. Either symbolic thinking emerged independently in multiple human species, or it has much deeper roots than previously thought, dating back to the common ancestor of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. Either possibility transforms our understanding of human cognitive evolution. Recent genetic studies of human brain development provide another critical insight. Genes affecting brain organization, particularly those involved in neuronal migration during development, show evidence of positive selection across multiple hominin species. This suggests parallel evolution of enhanced cognitive capabilities in different human lineages, not through identical genetic changes, but through different mutations affecting similar developmental pathways. A case of convergent evolution toward enhanced symbolic processing. When combined with evidence of interbreeding, this creates a complex picture. Different human species following separate but parallel paths of cognitive evolution, occasionally exchanging genes when they met, potentially accelerating cognitive development through genetic admixture. A reticulated pattern of cognitive evolution rather than a simple linear progression. These scientific advances collectively suggest a new narrative of how symbolic thinking emerged. Not in a sudden cognitive revolution 40,000 years ago, nor simply through gradual biological evolution spanning millions of years, but through a complex interplay of biological, social, and cultural factors. The neural foundations for symbolic thought began developing millions of years ago, with important expansions in Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and Homo heidelbergensis. By 500,000 years ago, these foundations supported rudimentary symbolic behaviors, geometric engravings, pigment use, and possibly simple rituals. Different human species, Neanderthals, Denisovans, early Homo sapiens, continued developing these capabilities along parallel evolutionary paths. Occasionally they met and interbred, potentially accelerating cognitive evolution through genetic exchange. But the full flowering of symbolic culture required more than neural capacity. It needed demographic and social conditions that could support sustained cultural accumulation, larger populations, denser networks, effective transmission mechanisms. When these conditions aligned around 40,000 years ago, symbolic culture exploded exponentially. Not because humans suddenly gained new cognitive capabilities, but because existing capabilities found unprecedented opportunities for expression, combination, and transmission. This narrative resolves many paradoxes in the archaeological record. It explains why we see early evidence of symbolic behavior that doesn't immediately lead to complex symbolic culture, why multiple human species appear to develop similar symbolic capabilities independently, why there seems to be both continuity and discontinuity in the emergence of symbolic thought. But it creates a new paradox, one that strikes at the heart of how we understand human uniqueness. If symbolic thinking emerged gradually across multiple species through gene-culture coevolution, is there anything that makes Homo sapiens truly exceptional? This question leads us to our final chapter, where we'll confront the most profound implication of our investigation, that the boundary between human and animal minds may be far more fluid than we've traditionally believed. That consciousness and symbolic thought may exist on a spectrum across species rather than as uniquely human traits, and that recognition may fundamentally transform how we understand not just our past, but our present and future as well. Chapter 10. The Symbolic Species, Reimagining Human Origins. We began this journey with a deceptively simple question. When did instinct become imagination? When did our ancestors first cross that threshold from reactive behavior to symbolic thought, from seeing only what is to envisioning what could be? The conventional answer placed this transition relatively recently, around 40,000 years ago, with the cave art and figurines of the Upper Paleolithic. A sudden cognitive revolution that made Homo sapiens unique among all species, past and present. But the evidence we've examined tells a different story. The engravings on shells from Java dating to 500,000 years ago, the geometric patterns on bones from 370,000 years ago, the arranged stones deep within Bruniquel Cave from 336,000 years ago. These fragments, scattered across time and geography, form a pattern too consistent to dismiss. They suggest symbolic thinking began emerging far earlier than we've traditionally believed, not 40,000, but 500,000 years ago or more. Moreover, this capacity appears to have developed not just in Homo sapiens, but across multiple human species. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo heidelbergensis, perhaps even Homo erectus. Not a unique human trait, but a shared heritage across the human family tree. This evidence, combined with recent advances in paleogenetics, neuroscience, and cultural evolution modeling, leads us to a revolutionary conclusion. Symbolic thought didn't emerge suddenly but gradually, through complex interactions between biological evolution and cultural innovation spanning hundreds of thousands of years. A process of gene-culture co-evolution. The neural foundations for symbolic thinking began developing millions of years ago and expanded significantly in Homo habilis, Homo erectus, and Homo heidelbergensis. By 500,000 years ago, these foundations supported rudimentary symbolic behaviors, creating geometric patterns, collecting colorful materials, possibly engaging in simple rituals. Different human species continued developing these capabilities along parallel evolutionary paths, occasionally exchanging genes when they met. This genetic admixture potentially accelerated cognitive evolution, creating a reticulated pattern rather than a simple linear progression. But neural capacity alone wasn't sufficient for the full flowering of symbolic culture. That required demographic and social conditions supporting sustained cultural accumulation, larger populations, denser networks, more effective transmission mechanisms. When these conditions aligned around 40,000 years ago, symbolic culture exploded exponentially. Not because humans suddenly gained new cognitive capabilities, but because existing capabilities found unprecedented opportunities for expression and transmission. This new understanding transforms how we conceptualize human cognitive evolution. Instead of a sudden leap that separated us from all other beings, we see a gradual awakening spanning hundreds of thousands of years and multiple species. Instead of a single cognitive revolution unique to Homo sapiens, we see parallel developments across the human family tree, accelerated through occasional genetic exchange and facing similar environmental challenges. A convergent evolution toward enhanced symbolic capacities. This revised timeline has profound implications for how we understand ourselves and our place in nature. It suggests that what we consider uniquely human, our capacity for imagination, for creating meaning beyond the literal, has much deeper evolutionary roots than we've recognized. It also suggests cognitive continuity between humans and other species, rather than an absolute divide. If symbolic thinking emerged gradually over hundreds of thousands of years, the boundary between human and animal minds becomes more fluid, more permeable. Perhaps most significantly, it challenges us to reconsider what we mean by human. If Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other extinct human species possessed symbolic thinking, albeit perhaps expressed differently than our own, were they not in the fullest sense human? Recent genetic evidence reveals that many of us carry their DNA, up to 4% Neanderthal in non-African populations, up to 6% Denisovan in some Asian and Oceanic groups. We are, quite literally, partly Neanderthal, partly Denisovan, partly archaic African hominin. These weren't separate species in the sense of being unable to interbreed successfully. They were different expressions of the human capacity for imagination, following parallel but occasionally intersecting evolutionary paths. Their extinction wasn't inevitable but contingent, the result of specific historical circumstances rather than cognitive inferiority. Had climate fluctuated differently, had diseases spread differently, had populations migrated differently, we might live alongside multiple human species today. This realization transforms how we understand human uniqueness. What makes humans special isn't that we alone possess symbolic thought, but that we've developed it to unprecedented levels of complexity and sophistication. The difference between human and animal minds appears increasingly as a matter of degree rather than kind. Great apes demonstrate rudimentary symbolic capabilities. Cetaceans and elephants show signs of self-awareness and cultural transmission. Corvids solve problems requiring abstract thinking. These capabilities aren't failed attempts to reach human-level consciousness, but alternative expressions of mind, different evolutionary paths toward awareness and understanding. The spectrum of consciousness extends far beyond our species, taking different forms across the animal kingdom. This doesn't diminish human uniqueness, but contextualizes it. We aren't separate from nature, but embedded within it, the current frontrunners in an ongoing cognitive evolution that began millions of years ago and encompasses many species. Our capacity for symbolic thought, for imagination, didn't appear suddenly from nowhere. It emerged gradually through natural processes, an evolution of mind paralleling the evolution of our bodies. As we look to our future, this understanding carries profound implications. If symbolic thinking emerged through gene-culture coevolution spanning hundreds of thousands of years, we might still be in the midst of this process, still becoming what we will be. Our increasing integration with technology may represent another transition in this ongoing cognitive evolution. Not a departure from our humanity, but an extension of the same process that has shaped human consciousness from its beginnings. Just as early symbolic behaviors created selective pressures favoring enhanced symbolic capabilities, our current symbolic systems, language, mathematics, digital technology, may be creating selective pressures favoring new cognitive capacities. Leaked, a continuing coevolution of biology and culture. This doesn't mean we're becoming post-human, but that we're continuing to evolve as humans always have, through complex interactions between our biology, our technologies, and our social systems. The story that began 500,000 years ago or more continues into our future. What remains constant throughout this journey is the distinguishing feature of the human mind, our capacity to imagine possibilities beyond the immediate and tangible, to create meaning through symbolic thought, to envision what could be, not just perceive what is. This capacity first emerged in those ancient beings who etched patterns on shells, arranged stones in geometric forms, collected and processed pigments for purposes beyond survival. Beings not yet fully human as we understand ourselves, but already reaching beyond instinct toward imagination. They were the first dreamers, the first to see beyond the literal, the first to create meaning through symbolic thought. And in doing so, they began the long journey that led to us, to our art, our science, our philosophy, our capacity to contemplate our own origins. As we conclude our investigation, we're left not with certainty but with wonder. Wonder at the gradual awakening of mind across deep time. Wonder at the complex interplay of biology and culture that shaped human consciousness. Wonder at the many expressions of imagination across the human family tree. We began by asking when instinct became imagination. We end by recognizing that this wasn't a moment but a journey, one that continues even now as we reach toward new horizons of understanding. A journey not of separation from nature, but of emerging complexity within it. Not of sudden revolution, but of gradual awakening. Not of human exceptionalism, but of consciousness gradually becoming aware of itself. This is the true story of human origins, not how we became separate from nature, but how nature through us became capable of understanding itself, how matter evolved to contemplate matter, how life evolved to reflect on life, how instinct evolved to transcend itself through imagination. And in this story we find not diminishment of human uniqueness, but a deeper appreciation of the processes that created it. Not a reduction of mind to matter, but a recognition of how mind emerges from matter through natural processes spanning vast stretches of time. We are symbolic creatures, beings who live not just in a physical world, but in a universe of meaning we ourselves create. This capacity didn't appear suddenly 40,000 years ago, but emerged gradually across hundreds of thousands of years, across multiple human species. It continues to emerge even now, in our art, our science, our technologies, our ever-expanding understanding of ourselves and our place in the cosmos. The journey that began 500,000 years ago continues with every act of human imagination. As our exploration concludes, we're left with a fundamentally transformed understanding of human cognitive evolution. The boundary between human and animal minds appears increasingly fluid, the emergence of symbolic thought increasingly gradual, the human capacity for imagination increasingly shared across our evolutionary family tree. We began by asking when instinct became imagination. We end by recognizing that this wasn't a single moment, but an ongoing process, one that continues even now as human consciousness evolves in dialogue with our technologies, our social systems, our changing environment. The engravings on ancient shells, the geometric patterns on bones, the arranged stones in dark caves, these aren't just archaeological curiosities, but glimpses into the awakening of mind. Into beings not yet fully human as we understand ourselves, but already reaching beyond the immediate and tangible towards symbolic meaning. In their tentative marks, their careful arrangements, their collected pigments, we see the first stirrings of the same capacity that produced the Sistine Chapel, quantum physics, and space exploration. The capacity to imagine possibilities beyond what is immediately present, to create meaning through symbolic thought. This capacity didn't emerge suddenly through genetic mutation or divine intervention, but gradually through natural processes spanning hundreds of thousands of years. Through complex interactions between our evolving brains, our social structures, our cultural innovations, what makes us human isn't that we alone possess symbolic thought, but that we've developed it to unprecedented levels of complexity and sophistication. The difference between human and animal minds appears increasingly as a matter of degree rather than kind, a spectrum rather than a divide. As we look to our future, this understanding offers both humility and hope. Humility in recognizing that our consciousness emerged through natural processes rather than separating us from nature. Hope in recognizing that this evolution continues, that we are not the end but the continuing development of mind. If you've been moved by this exploration of our cognitive origins, consider subscribing to journey with us through more of humanity's deepest mysteries. What sparked your curiosity most? Share below. Your thoughts are constellations in our collective understanding of what makes us wonderfully, mysteriously human.